Okay, it's your guy Kinne, and today we're going to go over 5 things to think about if you're considering or actively prepping to move to Houston, Texas. Okay, so one of the first things to think about if you're moving to Houston is the sheer size of Houston. It's overwhelming and if you haven't lived here or visited Houston, you really have no concept on how big Houston actually is. So there's a saying in Houston, no matter where you go in Houston, it's 30 minutes away. Not always true, but pretty close to accurate. Houston is huge and sprawling. So one thing that I have when I have relocation, people coming from out of state, out of city, or even overseas sometimes, is they'll name a place that they heard of, maybe a friend mentioned, this is nice, this has beautiful trees, beautiful homes, and they live on the opposite side of the city. So you hear about how great the Woodlands is, which is great, but you work in the Med Center. That's an hour to hour and 15 minute, maybe more, depending on traffic day. You're gonna hate yourself at the end of that first week, unless you can work remotely a lot. Second thing, maybe you heard about Katy and the great schools over here. Schools are great, but you work at a refinery in Pasadena. You're gonna equally hate your life if you buy a house in Katy and you're working in Pasadena. I do know people that do it, not for me. I definitely wouldn't wanna do it. So you really want to know where you're gonna work. And if you only work a couple days a week, maybe you can take it. But you wanna know where you're gonna work and then kind of gauge, talk to your real estate professional, we can help you, on how long you think it's actually gonna take you to drive. You and I both know the miles listed on a GPS don't always track with how long that drive is actually gonna take. Very rare you're gonna see 60 to 75 mile an hour traffic in Houston unless you're on Grand Parkway. So take into consideration, big time, the commute and the drive. The second thing I think you want to take into consideration, especially people coming from the Northeast, Houston is not a walkable city. It's spread out, it's sprawling, it's not compact like Manhattan, where a lot of people don't even own cars. They take the subway, what have you. We've got the metro rail downtown and kind of gets you from place to place if you're in the downtown Med Center area. Of course, we've got park and ride if you're coming from the outskirts that work on an interval. But as far as actual efficient public transportation, it really doesn't exist in Houston. You're gonna have to have a car, and you're gonna have to use your car a lot. And a lot of our roads are toll roads as well. So if you want something that's walkable, a real walkable environment where you can walk to the store, you can walk to bars and restaurants, you're probably going to want to be living in the city. The Heights, Montrose, Upper Kirby, Midtown, all these areas surrounding downtown and right around that corridor. And even there, it's not truly walkable. You're still gonna be Ubering a mile and a half to 3 miles here and there. So that's something to consider if you're coming from a walkable city. Houston is not gonna be your friend if you anticipate on it being walkable. Of course, Houston will be your friend though, because we like you. We're pretty friendly here. Okay. The third thing you might wanna think about, well, not might, the third thing you for sure wanna think about if you're relocating to Houston is what you like to do for fun. Now, Houston is on the coast. Galveston is maybe hour and a half, depending on where you live in Houston, from Houston. So you can get your beach in, you can get your sand in. Although Houston is sprawling, there are parks throughout. You got a little more green space as you get further away from town. You got places like Memorial Park, Herman Park, where you do have green space in the city. But if you're like me and you love your whiskey and your fine food and cocktails, the city is really where you're gonna be. Now, of course, not to say there's not great restaurants in all parts of Houston, but they're more condensed into your Galleria, your Upper Kirby, your Montrose, your Midtown, your Washington Ave, and your Heights. You're relocating to Houston, you're probably like, what did you just say? Those are all the areas and surrounding microcosms surrounding that downtown area where all the cool bars, restaurants, etc. are. If that's for you, you can still live out with me in the suburbs, but that Uber ride, cha-cha-ching. If you like cocktails and fine dining all the time, you're probably gonna wanna live closer to town than out here. The fourth thing to think about on our list today is yard size. Now, of course, there are small yards and big yards everywhere you go. Pricing becomes a big factor. If you've got a few dogs and you like to throw the Frisbee in the backyard, you're not gonna be living in the Loop unless you get that wallet out. You're getting into the millions of dollars if you're looking for a big yard like that most of the time, or a very, very, very old house you're gonna have to do a lot of rehab to. Of course, there's always outliers, but for the most part, the big yard, you're gonna be out in the suburbs. Out in the suburbs, you got plenty of space to run, plenty of places to play. If you need a big yard, you're probably gonna be further out than in, unless you're talking in the 7 figures on a price point to buy it. Yard size, thing to consider. All right, the last thing on our list today are schools. So schools in Houston are a big thing to a lot of people. The schools on the outskirts, we've got a lot of great ISDs. We've got Sugar Land, Fort Bend ISD, we've got Katy ISD, we have Lamar ISD, we've got your Woodlands, your Magnolia area. There's lots of great schools around. Most people that are relocating to Houston don't focus on the center of the city because a lot of times the schools don't meet the needs of their particular family. Of course, I don't know your family's needs. You'll want to do your own research on schools, but we do have great schools in Houston. Most of them are in the outskirts and the suburbs. And of course, in the Loop, you've always got private and magnet schools as well. Think about schools. If you're relocating to Houston, you can do your research online, and HR also has tools for you. Those are 5 things that we've gone through to think about if you'll be relocating to Houston. Always here to help. You can give us a shout. I'm your guy, Steve Kinne, Compass Real Estate, the Kinne Group, out.